Vladimir Guerrero Jr. had a strong showing in this past 2024 season, but does that performance make him worthy of the number one first baseman heading into 2025? We're going to be talking Vladdy and more on today's action-packed episode of Locked On Fantasy Baseball.
You are Locked On Fantasy Baseball, your daily fantasy baseball podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, fantasy baseball fanatics, and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Baseball podcast, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, we're your number one source of fantasy baseball knowledge, and thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Dominick Martino, riding solo today. If you're watching on YouTube and you haven't already, hit that little bell below. It will subscribe you to the channel and give you a notification every time we drop a new episode. And if you're listening on a platform like Apple or Spotify that allows 5-star ratings and reviews, we would truly appreciate it if you could do that for us. And lastly, most importantly to Matt and I, give us a chance on the Subtext platform. Through Subtext, it's an in-depth personalized experience through text messaging alerts right to your phone, offering so much more than we can in this 30-minute podcast. And this episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, the right state can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app too. Day. And all right, guys, we're still rock and rolling through these team reviews here. Interesting season for the Blue Jays. Really feel like they underperformed. A lot of guys on the team had higher expectations, did not reach them. Cough, cough, Bo Bichette. But we'll be getting into the specific players in a little bit here. The Blue Jays finished at the bottom of the AL East this year with a 74-88 record. Like I said, did not meet expectations. I think a lot had to do, with injuries, guys not living up to hype. And it's just a really tough division, man. That AL East is always pesky every year, year after year. Even since I was younger, man. I don't want to age myself too much, but at 32 years old, I can't remember a time since I was a kid that almost every team in that division is not at least somewhat competitive. So unfortunately for those Blue Jays, they finished at the bottom this year. Just like I said, really just tough season. A bunch of things. Let's get into the main cog here. The best guy on the team, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. He had a strong year. Vladdy. It stinks to see that his teammates didn't really help him as much as they could have. But let's just talk about Vladdy specifically. 159 games this year, 616 at bats, 98 runs. 44 doubles, a triple, 30 homers, 103 RBIs. He chipped in 2 steals. He walked 72 times, only struck out 96, and he had a .323 batting average. Now, this is what we all knew Vladdy was capable of. We remember that 2021 season where he had, a monster year. But in 2022, he took a step back. In 2021, they were still playing those minor league parks coming out of COVID, and I think that 2022 and this 2024 season are more of the type of years that we're going to see from Vlad. That plate discipline took a huge step forward this year. That walk to strikeout ratio, as I mentioned, plate discipline, 72 walks to 96 strikeouts, where last year Vladdy had 67 walks to 100 strikeouts. The year before, 58 walks to 116 strikeouts. So you see the progression there. I think Vladdy's a guy that's going to consistently hit 300. 30 home runs, 100, close to 100 runs, definitely over 100 RBIs pretty much every year. The sprint speed, the steals is an interesting thing because he's a little bit below average, but he normally can steal you between, let's say, 2 to 8 bases. That's his range. Love for it to, be a little bit higher, but for a big, bulky first baseman like Vlad, we don't really need that. Any steals that he's giving us is a little bit icing on the cake. He reminds me of, a kind of like a prime Freddie Freeman without, the 15 steal upside, but, it's the 30 homers with a really strong batting average. And I think the passing of the torch is officially here. I teased it a little bit at the top, and I'll throw it out there. Been messing with my rankings a little bit, did a little bit of first base work. And I have Vlad. I think for 2025, I think Vlad is the number one first baseman. I think he overtakes Freddie Freeman this year for me. Alonso had a down year. Olsen had a down year. Bryce Harper plays first base now. He had a pretty strong year, but I think Vlad, 26 years old, prime of his year next year. I hope the Blue Jays are going to be a little bit better for fantasy purposes for Vlad specifically. I own Vlad in 2 of my big keeper dynasty leagues. I told you guys to go out and trade for Vlad this year. Kind of just had the feeling that, the price was right. He was struggling at the beginning of the year. I'll tell you this. The trade that I made in a dynasty league, I picked up Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Tyler Glasnow for Ronald Acuna Jr. Now, that trade might not be looking super fantastic next year if Acuna comes back and, does his thing, but it really helped me out this year having Vladimir Guerrero Jr. on my team. I think for next year, we're going to be having to take him at the end of the first round. But if you pair of Vladdy with any of these, really fast deals, guys. So let's say Vlad falls to the second round and you take a Ellie De La Cruz, somewhere in the first round, you get a Vladdy in your second round. That combo works out perfect where Ellie might only hit 250, 260, but with 70 steals, Vlad's going to give you the power and the batting average that you need. He's not going to strike out a lot. He's going to help you in those points leagues. So I really love me some Vladimir Guerrero Jr. For 2025, and all the underlying stuff backs it up. Everything, the power, the bat speed, he doesn't strike out. Like all of it makes sense with the underlying stuff too. So I don't think there's anything to be worried about for Vladdy in 2025. Let's move on to somebody I am worried about, Bo Bichette. Matt and I talked about him a little bit this offseason so far, the disappointing 2024, but we're really going to deep dive it here, as we do the team review today and talk about his outlook for next season because it's an interesting name, right? Is there any value left? Is there anything that we can do here with Mr. Bichette? A little bit of an injury-plagued season. 26 years old this past year, 81 games for Bichette, 311 at-bats, 29 runs, 16 doubles, a triple, 4 homers, 31 RBIs, 5 steals, 20 walks to 64 strikeouts, and a .225 batting average. Not good. Let's actually check. I don't want to even – I know Bichette was a top 10 shortstop coming into the year, but let's see exactly where we had to take him because, he was always a little bit pricey. Pick 36 on average this season. Damn, we really did pay a little bit too much for Bichette. I had Bichette as my shortstop number 12 coming into the year. Wasn't really a firm believer. I knew the steals wasn't something that's sticky. I've talked about it every time I talked about Bichette this this year. He's not really fast. He's not really fast. So if the power and the average aren't playing like they did this year, and everything else isn't working either, the team's not hitting, he's not bringing much to the table at all, showing those numbers. But I think there's going to be value, right? I think we're going to be able to get Bichette hopefully outside of the top 100. And I think he turns to, he's going to be like a 25 homer guy. If he hits leadoff, the runs could be good. So you're talking about a guy that could be 100 runs. Let's look at the 2022 season for Bichette. I know we were talking about that as the baseline for Vlad, but ironically enough, I think this 2022 season for Bichette is kind of what we should be expecting going forward. And I don't think there's much room to grow on a line like this for Bichette, but 159 games in 2022, 652 at-bats, 91 runs, 43 doubles, 24 homers, 93 RBIs might be a lot, so that might be more of like an 80 RBI thing. 13 steals is a lot too. I don't think he's going to be a 13 bag guy, so maybe like a five bag type of guy, maybe 8. And a .290 batting average. So I think the batting average is sticky. Like I said, if he's at the top of a good Blue Jays lineup, you're talking a guy that can get 90-plus runs. The 24, 25 homers is legit because Bo does have some power. RBIs aren't going to be great, I don't think, at that leadoff position. And with the steals, like I said, about 5 steals. I think that's 5 to 8 steals is a realistic expectation for Bichette. But what I do like to see something here as I'm looking at these 2024 numbers for Bichette? 20 walks to 64 strikeouts, to where in 2023 Bichette had 27 walks to 115 strikeouts through 135 games. It was 81 this past season. So we like to see the progression from a young player in Bichette with the eye. If he bounced back next year and hit like 315 with the 25 homers and the good runs, I'm not shocked. So I could see myself buying into Bichette, but I'm not looking at upside. I don't think we start pushing him up and up and up if he's having a great spring training, because we have a lot of years of Bichette and we kind of see who this player is, and he's shaping up to be in his age 27 season in 2025. But we have names like George Springer and Dalton Varsho, and then we're gonna move into the starting pitching, which is actually very, very interesting for 2025. So I have those names I mentioned and more coming up next. Make sure you stay locked on. And guys, real quick, I need to talk to you about my friends over at Booking.com. Explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about. Those other baseball cities. Maybe it's your time to taste test your baseball competition stadium's cuisine. Luckily, on Booking.com, you can find the stadium stay that's just right for you. And, speaking of cuisine, I know some of these stadiums have awesome cuisine deals going on, or food deals, and like interesting food items. I know one team had like this crazy hot dog, another team had this crazy drink. So you know what? You might even want to check out, your rival baseball team, because they might have something interesting going on too. And guess what? You can use Booking.com's wide variety of choice across the U.S. You can go incognito to all your baseball rival cities. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, booking.yeah. And then, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch over to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And then Matt and I, want to talk to you guys again about the Locked On Podcast Fantasy Baseball Diamond Club on the Subtext platform, your ultimate fantasy baseball companion. As this offseason unfolds, you can rely on Matt and I for our dynamic content. You're going to get real-time alerts right to your phone, including ranking updates. We're going to be doing so much fun stuff, sleeper, breakouts, and bust. And then you can ask us your keeper dynasty questions too. We're really going to only be answering keeper and dynasty questions this offseason through Subtext. So make sure you check us out on there. You're going to stay ahead of your fantasy baseball league by joining the Diamond Club on Subtext, where the path to your victories begins. Subscribe now and elevate your fantasy baseball experience to a new level. And all right, folks, we're going to keep things pushing here. Let's, get into a couple more of these bats. Let's talk about some George Springer. Another guy I was just really out on, this coming into this season. George Springer's getting older. The numbers last year were okay with the 2020, and I just didn't think he was going to be able, to pull it off again. So let's break down some numbers here on Springer. 145 games played this year, 74 runs, 19 doubles, 3 triples, 19 homers, 56 RBI, 16 steals, 60 walks to 115 strikeouts, and he hit 220 at age 34. Father time comes for everybody, man. It just happens. It's getting to George Springer. I want to thank him for all the good years. When he was in Houston, and I definitely had him a few years, helped me win a couple fantasy championships. But I think it's time. I think it's time that we can still take him next year, right? If the price is right. Coming into this year, I want to see where he was going. I know he was getting drafted fairly high, because I had him, I think, around my outfielder like 30 or something like that. Where was he coming off the board? Springer was coming off the board at outfielder 25, pick 101. So, 1916 with the homers and steals, 220 batting average. Walk to strikeout rate isn't atrocious, isn't the worst I've ever seen. I don't think he returned value. I think he was right below it, if anything. If he's going next year, because outfielder, 25, it's technically your outfielder number 3. I'm not mad at 19-16 from your outfielder number 3 with the 220 batting average. Definitely needs to be better. Springer's a career 262 guy, but I don't know if he ever gets back to that at age 35 next year. Springer's probably just going to be a guy I'm going to be fading. I think outfielder's actually going to be a little bit better coming into 2025 than we realize. A lot of guys that were below Springer kind of take that step ahead of him. And I think Seiya Suzuki, Teoscar Hernandez, Anthony Santander, the Jackson Churios, the Wyatt Langford. So that's even a bunch of guys right there that I think surpass Springer going into next year. So if the value's right, maybe Springer for 2025. I just feel like I was disappointed by his numbers this year. Not that I had any shares. I don't even think I had him on any of my fantasy teams this year, George Springer. But just still looking at the numbers, I feel like it could have been a little bit better. I want to keep things pushing here, though, for time's sake. Let's move on to Dalton Varsho. Just another disappointing, Blue Jays player here. Varsho, I don't think he was coming off the board too much further than Springer, was he? Right? Maybe I'm wrong here. As I scroll through the names here, I thought you guys were like Varsho a little bit more. I wasn't really much of a fan myself. It looks like he was going pretty late, unless I already skimmed over him. But let's break down the numbers, because that's not even super important. Varsho in 2024 played 136 games, 459 at-bats, 73 runs, 21 doubles, 7 triples, 18 homers, 58 RBIs, 10 steals, 48 walks, 137 strikeouts, hit 214. Varsho's a guy I feel like I know who he is. I know who he is at this point in his career, maybe between 18 and 23 home runs. He's going to chip you in some steals. The batting average is never going to be something he's fantastic at. So I'm expecting around his career mark every year, around a 225 batting average. So with a guy like Varsho, another guy that I don't think we're really going to have to pay, a huge price on him next year. I just don't see it happening. Because, he lost that catcher eligibility a few years ago, and it's okay. Here we go. Varsho's coming off the board last year's the 51st outfielder, pick 202. I think that's value. I think you could take a guy that's going to give you 18 and 10 with a solid run total with 73. Going to be 28 next year, Varsho. And I think if we get that same kind of value, you could tap in there. That's not going to kill you. Getting him as a pretty much a bench bat or, a second utility, I'm not mad at it. I'm really not mad at that from Varsho, actually. But the batting average always leaves so much to be desired. But like, he's like a George Springer light, as we go back and talk about his teammate, real quick, because what were Springer's numbers? Were they that much different than that? No, they weren't really at all, with the 1916 and 220 and a little, maybe you get a couple more points of batting average, a little bit of walk to strikeout ratio. But 100 picks later, Varsho actually paid off. I do want to sneak in one more bat here before we wrap up bats and move into the arms here. Let's talk about Joey Perfido. He came over in the trade from Houston about, I think it was midway through the year, and he was somewhat of a higher end prospect. He can hit, he does have a good track record in the minors, but when he came over, it was only 43 games with the Blue Jays. He hit 197 with 2 bombs and 2 steals. But this kid's got, like I said, a strong, minor league track record, right? This year in the minors, it was 13 homers in 39 games with 9 steals and a 272 batting average. In 2023, more of the same with 25 homers, 27 steals, 278 batting average. But Perfido comes over and just, to the bigs and just hasn't really done it. A name I'm keeping my eye on in spring training, seeing how he's doing. If at 25, 26 next year, it's kind of make the move or get off the pot moment for Perfido. Not a sexy name, just in those deeper leagues, AL only. Is one of the throw out a name that could potentially be interesting. And before we talk about the starting rotation and the Blue Jays closer, I want you guys to stick around because I got names like Gaussman, Berrios, and Romano coming up next. And guys, want to talk to you real quick about my friends over at FanDuel. With FanDuel, when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And with football season being here, FanDuel has so many fun and interesting bets that you can literally do as you're browsing that page and checking those stats and viewing the live play-by-play. So it makes it so much more interesting as you're watching the game. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Once again, that's going to be at FanDuel.com. And then I want to talk to you guys about Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. With Game Time Picks, curation makes it easier to save more on sports, comedy, concert, and theater. Game Time has plenty of great features as well, such as their all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. With their seat views, you get a panoramic view from the actual seat you'll be sitting in the app before you buy. Their lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you up to 110% of the price difference. Game Time's ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered by the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, folks, home stretch here. Let's talk about some starting pitching, and let's start with the supposed ace of the team, Kevin Gausman. Man, oh man, was Gaussman disappointing this year, and it was tough because the last couple of years, Matt and I had finally bought in on Gaussman. Not that I had much shares because I really didn't. I didn't have any shares. I actually was almost in the middle of trading for Gaussman in the offseason in one of my dynasty leagues, and I'm actually happy I didn't. Gaussman was coming off the board going into 2024 as the fifth starting pitcher off the board, pick 31. So you paid a steep price, and man, it just didn't work out. It's tough with guys like Gaussman because you never really know as these guys get a little bit older when the other shoe is going to fall off. And unfortunately, I think this is it for Gaussman. At age 33, he had a 3.83 ERA this year. He pitched 181 innings. He only had 162 strikeouts, and he had a 1.22 WHIP. So he only pitched 4 less innings than he did last year, but he had almost like 60, less strikeouts. And that's crazy to me. The fall off is legitimate. The skills and the stuff isn't playing up the way it did. And Gaussman is, a guy throughout his career notoriously has struggled with command and whip. So as we see the whip going back up in the wrong direction, Gaussman's not a guy that I'm paying up for at all next year. Honestly, I'm going to be out because I still think he's going to be like a top 20 drafted starting pitcher, and I'm not going to pay that price for him. I think there's a lot more guys, when we do our starting pitcher breakdown and stuff like that, I'll really get into depth with. But I just can't see me taking him on over any of these upside guys or just guys that have a solidified track record behind them. And, as I said, the skills are fading. He's getting older, going to be 34. Father Time is undefeated. And I think Gaussman is going to just, take that turn, even if it's just more of the same next year, even if it's a high 3s ERA with under a K per 9 and a bad whip. 14 wins on the Blue Jays this year was actually pretty nice, because the Blue Jays weren't that great of a team to still see that he pulled out 14 wins is pretty cool. Gaussman does tend to go longer into games, so that helps him. He would just be a guy that I have to get him as like my SP4, and that's just not going to happen going into 2025. So by all means, if you guys want to be of the keeping the faith mindset with Gaussman, be my guest. He's just going to be probably somebody that's not for me, next year. Let's move on to another starting pitcher from the Toronto Blue Jays. Let's talk about that man, Jose Berrios. Now, he was a guy that I was kind of semi-fading. I actually have a buddy who I work with that is a big Berrios guy. Kind of made me push him up, deep dive on him and say, okay, you know what? Maybe there is still a little bit something there. And you know what? Berrios had a very Berrios season like he did last year. So he played up on that. 16 wins for Berrios this year. Actually, it's crazy to see him and Gaussman have such high win totals. 32 starts for Berrios, 3.60 ERA, 192 innings, 153 strikeouts with a 1.15 whip. Berrios has always been a bad FIP guy, though. I look at his FIP at a 4.72. If you don't know what FIP is, it's fielding independent pitching. It's an ERA indicator. Kind of shows you where the ERA is trending towards rather than where it is. So with that being said, K's underwhelming, but you know what? Berrios just still gave you a solid season. Where was he being drafted? He's another one that is going to be interesting to see. 42nd starting pitcher, pick 154. So that's not too shabby, right? It's a decent return on value. You would have loved to see a little bit more in the strikeout department, but you know what? Berrios, that's not really his thing anymore these days. If the value's right, I'll be in next year. I probably want him later than that. When you're talking about 12-man teams, I probably would like Berrios as my SP5, to be honest with you. I think that's where I feel comfortable with him. If I can get him there, I will be taking him there. If not, probably going to be fading him for the most part. Let's move on to the next guy in the rotation. Let's talk a little bit of Chris Bassett. It's funny when you see Bassett, Berrios, and Gaussman. I remember when all these guys were actually younger, coming through their respective teams' systems at the time. And just like this rotation, like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, would have been something I was really excited about. But not so much anymore. Chris Bassett this last year, 31 starts, 10 wins, 4.16 ERA, 171 innings, 168 strikeouts, with a 1.46 whip. So the whip really, really killed Chris Bassett this past year. And, control actually for the last, quite a few years, last 4 or 5 years, Bassett's actually been okay with it. He's another guy going to be 36 in 2025. I mean, if he hangs it up, Bassett's definitely another guy helping win a couple of fantasy baseball championships. So I like to thank Bassett, but he's just somebody that I really won't be, paying any sort of price for. Bassett was coming off the board this year as the 32nd starting pitcher, pick 118. Another guy really didn't have too many shares of Bassett this past year. Wasn't a huge fan of his. Just knew he was getting a little bit older, and the price was way too high for me on him for somebody that I just knew wasn't going to take a step forward. So why am I going to pay? Like I said, where is going to pick 32? That's your SP3. So you would need really a lot for him to live up for that hype, and just didn't. So Bassett's just somebody not a great name for me. This past year or next year. Let's move on to somebody I'm excited about. Let's talk about Bowden Francis. Bowden Francis, man, just really, really finished the year strong. Came up, was very, very impressive. As I clicked the wrong name there on Baseball Reference. Give you a little peek behind the mirror there. But Bowden Francis, 6'5", 220, big righty, good stuff. And just was really showing out. He had 13 starts this year, but it was 27 appearances overall in the majors for the Blue Jays. A 3.30 ERA, 103 innings, 92 strikeouts. He had a 0.92 whip. So very impressive. I want to just talk about some of his final, starts down the stretch. They were just really, really good starts. He had a start on August 29th this past year, 7 innings, didn't give up any hits. Gave up 1 hit, had 5 strikeouts, no walks, was really impressive. Then 2 starts later on September 11th, he had an 8-inning start where he gave up 1 earned run, gave up 1 hit, 1 walk, had 1 strikeout as well. So Bowden Francis isn't a guy that I don't think is ever going to be a big strikeout guy, but in the Kyle Hendricks sense, he could be, under that K per 9, not a crazy amount, really suppress runs, have a very low ERA. I think he's a kid that, not even a kid, he's 28, wouldn't be 29 next year, but somebody that we could, see a step forward from, give this guy, a good amount of innings. The underlying stuff, there's some stuff that could be desired. I wish he got a little more swing and miss in his game. But you know what? It doesn't get hit very hard. Has walks under his belt. It doesn't really give up too many of those. Has a good fastball. Has good off-speed stuff. So I really, really like that from Bowden Francis. The one pitch, the curveball gets hit a little bit too much. So that's not, something he could, mix out a little bit, because he does have a good pitch mix too. He This year he was throwing the 4-seamer at 51%, the split finger at 18, curveball at 18. Maybe he needs to mix in that slider sinker a little bit more, which he threw 9% and 2% respectively. Move that curveball down a little bit that got smacked around, and voila, you got yourself a good starting pitcher. But let's move on to their closer as I close up with this episode. Jordan Romano dealt with injuries this year. Romano is more of somebody that Matt is really in on. I was in on Romano back at the beginning of his career. As he's gotten older, though, he's started to age, not super gracefully. Let's break it down here real quick, as we wrap this one up and I, head out. But this past season, Jordan Romano took a big step in the wrong direction at age 31, a 6.59 ERA in 15 games, 13 innings, 13 strikeouts, 1.46 whip. I'm another guy I'm probably going to be fading. There's so many good closers out there in the league right now, and just Romano is, I think, on a downswing. He will be better. He will be a guy that, could have like a low 3s, high 2s ERA, a little bit over that caper 9. Whip is something that's not Romano's strong point as far as closers go. You really expect a very low whip. 1.22 whip in 2023, a 1.01 whip in 2022, and a 1.04 whip in 2021. You like that to be a little bit lower on your closers. Top 15 closer Romano, yeah, sure, why not? Because he does have a solid track record. He's going to be 32 next year, and sometimes when you see these closers get older, teams like to opt for a young flame baller to get in there, like the Ben Joyce types, and just go lights out. But as we close up the episode here, I want to give a shout out to our everydayers and new listeners making Locked On Fantasy Baseball your first listen each and every day. And after you make us your first listen each and every day, go listen to our boy Sully over at Locked On MLB. Does a great job covering the league a little bit differently than we do, especially here in the playoffs. He's more focused on what's going on now. We're more focused on reviewing and going into the future in 2025. So go on and check him out. But guys, until next time, see you.